Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. One episode is not nearly enough time to touch on all that my guest has accomplished and still actively involved in today. But we're going to shed some light on where and how all this began. A single mother who, out of desperation at a moment when she saw her life as she knew it come crashing down, she couldn't possibly know the profound effect she'd have on the lives of tens of thousands of wrongfully incarcerated men and women. Jessica Jackson is a human rights attorney and COO and Chief Advocacy Officer for Reform Alliance. Their mission is to create a bipartisan, collaborative organization working to reform probation and parole as we know it by changing the laws, the systems, and culture to create pathways to work and well-being. It all began with getting her GED, or maybe it was her husband getting arrested. So when your children say to you, Mom and Dad, I'm dropping out of high school, don't worry about it because you have no idea what the future brings. Anything and everything is possible. Jessica Jackson, welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you for having me on.
Can we start off, please, with your mom's name?
Sure. My mom's name is Maria Ekstrand, and she is from Stockholm, Sweden, and has been just a force in my life and in many others.
And how did you refer to your mom growing up?
That's interesting that you asked that. I actually did not call her mom. We called her Mia, which was her nickname for Maria.
From when all you remember, it was always Mia.
Yeah, I'm sure I probably said mama when she was little, and at some point as a adult I started saying mom, but growing up I always called her Mia.
That's pretty great. I like that. Our mom asked us to start calling her Linda, say from middle school on. It was like, okay, whatever makes you happy.
I think her point was, if you're in a grocery store and you yell mom, 100 women are going to look for you, right? But if you yell Mia, only one was coming. So, yeah.
My boys, interesting, call me by my first name and I automatically will turn, right?
Yeah.
So it's the exact same thing. And did you grow up speaking Swedish at home?
With my grandparents, I spoke Swedish until we moved out to California. So I was probably 3 or 4 years old. But in our home, we spoke English. I think when I was younger, I was mixing the two up quite a bit. So they decided, to keep me with English and make sure that I had that down first. But my mom did work really hard to make sure that we continued to have ties to Sweden. We maintained our citizenship with Sweden. All three of us ended up, my siblings and I ended up going over to Sweden for some period of time. We all participated in Swedish holiday events through the Swedish Women's Association when we were growing up. And she certainly worked hard to instill the culture in all of us.
From what I know, the two of you are very similar in what your aspirations were for the world and to fulfill yourselves. Am I right? And helping people?
Yeah. It's interesting because my path, I think, was a lot bumpier than my mom's was, just in the decisions I made and different roads traveled. Hers was a lot more straighter shot, which was pretty intimidating when I was younger and trying to find my way, because here she was. She had always been, just brilliant, and she'd always been such a good student, and Phi Beta Kappa, and just incredible student. And I felt like she had kind of had her purpose and known what she wanted to do, whereas I was a little bit more lost along the way and faltered quite a bit. But we definitely ended up doing very similar work, even down to the fact that, the populations we work with, her with people with HIV and AIDS, and me with people in prisons, have a lot of the same issues when it comes to stigma and need for educating legislators and policy reform, and a lack of government funding, and oftentimes, a difficult uphill battle when it comes to public opinion and media. And, I think she was a pioneer in her field in a very exciting time. She was involved very early in the AIDS epidemic, and obviously incarceration's been around forever. So we certainly came into our fields at different points, but I think that we both have the same aspirations, as you said, for helping people and leaving a mark.
Was it something that she would speak to you and your siblings? My mom would say to us, I'm the youngest of seven, so it was, okay, 10% of your 50-cent allowance, you have to put in
Yeah.
this tin for charity. But she would say, what have you done for the world today? Or what are you doing to help the world? And as a little kid, you're like, wow, that's a pretty big question. So did she talk about
Yeah.
that, the world, and you compared to the world, or
Yeah. My
spreading your
mom,
tentacles out and things like that?
my mom had me pretty young. She had me at 25. She was in grad school. I was definitely not planned, but 6 days after she had me, she was back in the classroom, holding me. Luckily, I was a little 5 pound thing, so
Hmm.
I don't think I made too much noise. Um, and she just sort of continued from there, right? She went and did her postdoc in Mississippi. She went out to San Francisco again early in the AIDS epidemic. She was just sort of bringing me along with her because she didn't really have a whole lot of support. She didn't really have, family out in San Francisco or anything like that. And so I don't think it was so much that my mom talked to us. I think it was more that she showed us, right? Like some of my earliest memories are going to World AIDS conferences with my mom, watching her speak, or being at her office. And, it was primarily gay men who were there working, and many of them were positive of HIV. And I got to know them, I got to know their stories. One of her close colleagues passed away when I was very, very young. And I remember, that from AIDS. And I remember that. And I remember the AIDS quilt. And I remember another time when I don't think I could have been more than 8, 9, 10, somewhere around there. And we went to a hospice to get somebody who had AIDS, and we were taking him to a temple. He was a Hindu, and we were taking him to a temple. And I just remember how frail he was, and helping, my mom said, help him down the stairs. And I was trying to help him down the stairs. And I more so saw what she was doing and saw it through the lens of other people telling me. I had conversations with people she was helping, or her colleagues, when I was around the office. And it never really was that she was like telling me, oh, you need to go out and change the world. It was that she was showing me how to do it.
And the impact that she was making on other people's lives. It's that common thread of the compassion and understanding. Not that she knew these people before they were sick, but just getting to know them,
Yeah.
and seeing and feeling the suffering that they were going through. Because back then we knew their future basically, and it wasn't bright. We didn't
Right.
have the cure so much so yet.
Right.
And the same for today. We have medications that can prevent the progression of the disease, but it's a matter of determination, never giving up, believing in what you're doing, maybe.
Absolutely. And I think, the other thing that's interesting is people often ask me, how did you become so resilient, right? I've done things that, by all accounts, I shouldn't have been able to do, right? Like convincing Trump to, let people out of prison. Um, and I think that comes from my mother too. I think my mom had this resilience to her, has this resilience to her. And growing up, she didn't tell us, oh, you can do anything, or anything cliche like that. She just showed us, right? Like I felt as though growing up, there was nothing that my mother couldn't do, that she couldn't get done. Like she never let any obstacles stop her from accomplishing what she wanted to accomplish. And if I came home and was complaining, oh, I couldn't get this done, or I couldn't do that, um, it was almost like she, expected us to find a way around things and expected us to figure out how to get things done. So in some ways, I think, my resilience, I'm sure grew stronger through circumstance, but in a lot of ways it came from my mom and just the you can do anything, you can achieve anything if you work hard enough attitude that she had with us. And I think, on top of the empathy and compassion that I learned from her, I think the resilience really is what has helped me the most in my career and in my life.
Not taking no for an answer, not backing down, all of
Yeah, there
those
was
things, right?
never like
Did not
there
even
was never
enter
a
your mind.
situation. Yeah, there was never a situation where I saw my mom like give up, right? Like she just
Wow.
kept going. And I'm sure it was hard with two kids and being a single mom and later a third child. And I'm sure it was hard, being on the ground as a government employee working on this epidemic. And I just never saw it get to her. I never saw her intimidated by anything. It never occurred to me that something could happen that you couldn't find a way around because I saw my mom use, creativity and her intelligence and just sheer willpower sometimes to get things done. And I think that really was such an incredible model for me growing up. And it's hard to replicate now as a mom, with my own kids, especially because as a mom, you just want to do things for them. But I think in a lot of ways, my mom had us, figure out our own problems with her guidance, and that helped set the stage for being able to do so later.
I was just going to ask, would she sit down, like if you say, oh, I can't figure this out, or if you even use that vernacular, would she sit down and spend time with you and talk about it, or she would just watch from wherever she was to see if you were proceeding forward?
Yeah, I think it was a combo of both, but I think, I think I certainly felt like her expectation was that I would figure it out, right? And,
Yeah.
maybe she would give me the tools to do so. Despite her being a single mom, we always went to, incredible camps and had those kind of experiences and went to good schools. And, she even at one point picked up and moved the family outside of the city. So she was then commuting into the city just so we could be in better schools. So I think she did a good job of making sure that we were equipped with the right tools to solve issues. And then there was just an expectation that we would do so. I'm sure there were times she talked us through things, but I think a lot of sort of the power of her parenting came from just her belief in our abilities and her instilling that belief in us, right? Like I remember coming home and trying to make excuses for a bad grade or a bad test or not having done an assignment. And it was like, no, what? Like,
Oh,
this is not
man.
your best work, right? Like, you have a duty to go out there and be your best and do your best. And she was not upset if something was legitimately outside of, what we could do our best, but if she saw I wasn't trying, that's when she was upset, right? That's
Yeah.
when we got a talking to, or I got a talking to. My brother was perfect, but
Oh,
that's
yeah.
when I
Aren't they all?
that's when I got a talking to because, she knew how much I was capable of and she really, really believed in me. And in some ways, as an adult, as I, started to encounter, as a young adult, as I started to encounter my own challenges, that belief in myself sort of showed up. And I think that really was instilled by her.
You are so lucky. That is such a gift. Self confidence can go a long way. We have to believe in ourselves too, but that's a big mountain
Yeah.
for some people to climb.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. But if you think about it, at one point in my life, I had dropped out of high school. I had decided to, drop out of high school my senior year because I was in a boarding school and I hated it. And I ended up down in Georgia where my dad was, and bartending and living my own crazy life. I was dabbling in drugs and, dating the wrong guys and ended up getting married very, very young and had a baby. And when my daughter was 2 months old, I was only 22, and my daughter was 2 months old. My husband was arrested and taken in on a 15 serve 6 sentence for his own drug issues. And at that point, I mean, that was the lowest point of my life, right? We were losing our house. I had a 2-month-old. I had no education. I had been working literally for $6.30 at a daycare, which I didn't want to continue to do because there wasn't housing for, that amount of money. I was on government assistance just to eat. And it was such a low point in my life. But the first thing that popped into my head when, I came home to Marin, where my mom lived, and was sort of lamenting everything that had happened. And, my mom, of course, recognized what a bad situation this was. So she let me stay for a little while I was figuring things out. And, I remember her asking me like, okay, what do you want to do next? Like, what's the next move here? And, it popped into my head. I want to be a lawyer because I had just seen right? Like, here's this kid that hated school, did terrible in high school, was doing drugs, was just a mess and dropped out. And now I've got a baby and a husband in prison. And, it popped in my head that I wanted to be a lawyer because I had seen how terrible the legal system was when it came to our family. And I was now doing, going to visitation and seeing him and seeing all these other families that had been through terrible things. So if you think about that moment, right, there's literally no reason why somebody in that position should, think, okay, I'm going to become a lawyer and actually set out and do it. But I did. And I think a lot of that is, my mom had told me I could do any or taught me I could do anything I wanted to do.
That's the best.
And I didn't know how hard that journey was going to be. And I remember her telling me, you're going to have to take the LSAT and go to college and then take the, go to law school, take the bar. Like, it's not going to be an easy road. But she had just believed in me. And for some reason, I believed in myself in that moment. And thank God I did, because it ended up working out. And if it wasn't for that, who knows where I would have been and who knows where my daughter would be today. Probably not a freshman in college herself.
Yeah, it's amazing. No mountain is too high to climb when you're motivated and you have the support to do it.
Yeah, or when you don't know that,
or you don't
that
know,
everything's stacked against you.
But was it like, okay, so your mom was like, you've had enough time to feel sorry for yourself. Now, okay, now we need to take action.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people could get caught. Yeah, a lot of people could get caught in that moment, right? Where you're like, okay, well,
My life is over.
Yeah, I'm just gonna wallow here. And again, she saw too much in me to let me sit there and go that route. And I think at that point, I saw too much of myself, and I certainly did not want to let my own daughter down, right? A lot of the reason I think that I stopped doing drugs and, found a purpose in my life is because I had my own daughter. And I'll never forget sitting in the bathroom at the courtroom. I was nursing, and right after he was taken away by the bailiffs. And I remember I went into the bathroom to nurse her, because this is Georgia back in 2004. You certainly weren't going to nurse her on a bench in public. And I was just sitting there looking at her. And of course, she's 2 months old. She has no idea what's going on. And she's staring up at me with these like big blue eyes. And I'm like crying all over this baby. And it just was like this feeling that like, I have to do something. I have to be more than this. This can't be her life,
Oh my gosh. Moms are amazing. They really are. The emotion, and you said she didn't know what was going on, but she emotionally, I think there's that connection that always transpires between a mom and a child.
Absolutely.
But the will to carry on is often unstoppable. Did your maternal grandmother play a huge role in your mom's life?
Yeah, she does. Berit, that was her name. And she was also just incredible. She grew up in Sweden. And she's this tiny little woman. I don't think she could have been more than, 5 foot, 5'2". Just tiny little woman. But she was just so full of life and spirit. And she was, one of the most kind human beings you ever met. My great uncle owned a hotel, and my grandmother worked at the front desk in her later years, and every single guest like had some story about her. She was just going out of her way to help them. And she was brilliant. She was absolutely brilliant. It was sad. She could have been just an incredible doctor or professor or something, but she grew up in a family that they didn't have a lot of money and they couldn't afford to send her two big brothers to school. So even though she was brilliant and ended up in Mensa and teaching herself like 7 languages, they wouldn't send their youngest daughter to university when they couldn't send their sons. So she really didn't have a whole lot of choices. She could be a teacher or a secretary, and she ended up being a teacher in Sweden, and then helping my grandfather with his business once they were married. But she was just an incredible force, and I was so lucky because while my mom was in graduate school, my grandmother and grandfather actually lived in the States, and I was very, very, very close to my grandmother. And she stayed she stayed one of my best friends all the way up until she passed away, which is about 7 years ago now, 8 years ago now. It was right after my second daughter was born. But this is a woman who, for her 80th birthday, had us all hike a mountain. And then at the very top, she did the splits. Like, that's what kind of woman she was. Or one of my favorite pictures, often when somebody gets cancer, which she did at the end, you don't like to look back at the pictures. You don't want to remember them that way. But I will say one of my favorite pictures is I brought my then 4-month-old second daughter out to Sweden to see my grandmother, and she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, very sick. And she saw I was doing tummy time with my daughter. And she was pushing up, trying to push up and get her head up. And my grandmother got down on the floor and started doing push-ups and told her, "This is what you need to be doing." And that's just who she was. She was just an incredible force. And probably, I'm lucky. I come from a long line of very strong, very resilient, very spirited women.
Now, how do you translate that? Because you had the opportunity to spend time with your grandmother and your mom, obviously. What is the language that you speak with your daughter about her past generations and the lineage that she has backing her up?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and maybe all kids kind of go through this to their own extent. I think we end up you're younger, you're listening to your parents, you're paying attention, and then you hit 12, 13, and suddenly your friends kind of are where you put your focus, and you're listening to them more than your parents. And I think that stays pretty consistent until you're 22, 23, 24, somewhere in there. And for me, it was the extreme. Like, I rejected everything my parents said once I turned like 12, 13, and really didn't find my way back to them until I was in my early 20s and had become a mother myself. But my daughter is now 18, and I guess I've very much done what my mom did. I had her very young. I started college right away, and she sort of grew up on college campus, and then on my law school campus. Like, half the pictures of her from age 4 to 7, she's playing in a classroom or sitting in the back of a classroom or, hanging out with one of my professors while I'm trying to get homework done.
It's like osmosis.
Yeah. And because of that, and then later when I ran for office, she was on the campaign. And when I was on city council and mayor, she was in the back of the council room and then playing on the dais. And, I think it's very much similar to sort of the way I was always just kind of there with my mother and watching and learning from her. My daughter has been too. And, now she's 18 and she's just declaring her major, and she wants to get into international relations and politics and go on and become an attorney. But she's very involved in criminal justice issues and always wants to sort of tag along and be a part of it, and even has started doing some of her own stuff, right? Some of her own organizing now, which I'm so proud of. So I think, my mom's sort of show 'em, don't tell 'em philosophy rubbed off on me, maybe
Sure.
partially because circumstances demanded it, but partially because, that's how I grew up, and sort of what I knew.
Wow, it's great. It is, we're so fortunate. I'll just say that.
Absolutely.
And the fact that you're giving back so much still to this day is just remarkable. I would love to share just a little bit of how much you do to help those in need. Basically, you try and keep people from going back into the criminal justice system because it needs to be reformed, as Reform Alliance is called, because it's not beneficial. It's putting a Band-Aid on things, and it's just backfiring into a kind of a big mess. Is that a correct summation from
Yeah.
layman's terms?
Yeah, I mean, I try and get as many people out of our system as possible. We've got 4.65 million people who are on probation and parole. We've got another 2.2 million people who are currently incarcerated. So that may sound like not that many to some people, but we've got 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population. So many men and women behind bars, for all sorts of different reasons. And it's having a huge impact on their families, a huge impact on their children. Kids whose parents are incarcerated are 8 times more likely to end up incarcerated themselves. So it's got a generational impact, obviously an economic impact on families like mine. Who are experiencing incarceration. And then there's a traumatic impact, right? An impact on a child's mental health, on a partner's mental health, and on the mental health of the person who's actually incarcerated as well. So you're just seeing this incredible impact. And what's saddest about the system is that we're spending billions and billions of dollars every year on this, and the results are just not there. There's no return on investment. In fact, the recidivism rate, the number of people who end up back in after they've been released, is about 68%. And that's incredibly high, right? Like if there was a stock that was failing 68% of the time, you wouldn't just keep putting money in it. What we've done is we've identified, evidence-based solutions that are out there, alternatives to incarceration, programs for people who are inside of prison, rehabilitative supports for people who are inside of prisons, ways to divert people from ever going to prisons and jails, ways to shorten sentences, and programs that work for people who are reentering society to help them get housing and jobs and mental health services and substance abuse services and whatever other things they might need and get back on their feet. And through these programs, we see much, much higher success rates, sometimes as high as 86% when you're actually helping, people deal with the underlying reasons why they committed a crime versus just locking them in a cage and letting them out 10 years later. So that's the crux of what I do. And, I'm fortunate to have an incredible board and a organization that has resources to support this work. And we've been really lucky to be able to mainstream this issue in the last few years and get some really positive attention around the success stories that's helped us, combat the really tough on crime narrative that's been out there for decades.
And you get up every morning and you do it all over again.
Yep.
Wow. That's very impressive. We are, unfortunately, like I said, one episode is not anywhere near enough time to cover everything, but we have such a wonderful insight into your inspiration and your beginning and your stepping stones, and it really is possible for anyone.
It really is.
It really is, and you're living proof of that. I really appreciate you coming on the show, Jessica Jackson from Reform Alliance. Please say hi to your mom from all of us. I should have listened to my mother. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.